why do sometimes works of really, really famous scholars have weak hadiths? Well, one is because of a difference of opinion in how weak hadith are used. There's a difference of opinion among scholars about whether or not weak hadiths can be used for certain things. So can they be? So the famous difference of opinion is whether or not weak hadiths can be used to inspire people in matters of virtue. The way the principle works is if a good deed or a moral act is already authentically established as good. So, for example, truthfulness is good, prayer is good, salah is good, fasting is good. These things are already authentically established as good, right? These are virtues that are authentically already established. Is it permissible to further encourage a person if there is a weak hadith that has some encouraging words in it, that mentions some extra virtue, or that perhaps has a story in it that is inspirational and may encourage a person to take inspiration from it and therefore act according to its content? That means essentially the consequence of the inspirational message, although in a weak narration, the consequence of that inspirational message will be for that person to go and pray, wake up for Fajr, keep nafil fasts, be more truthful, avoid the haram, etc., etc. If an established virtue is further encouraged by a message in a weak hadith, can that weak hadith be used? Here, there's a difference of opinion. Most scholars say that in that situation, weak hadiths can be used, and some scholars, a relative minority of scholars, say that even in that situation, weak hadith should not be used. So that's one thing. The other thing to bear in mind also is that there are also opinions, even that Shaykh al-Fatah mentions, even of great scholars like Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who say that there is leniency with regards to using weak narrations when it comes to matters of piety, matters of spirituality. And therefore, often books that are written, this may be one of the reasons why books that are written about tasawwuf, or books that are written about spirituality in general, books that are written about softening of the heart, books that are written about developing good character, good morals, good akhlaq, the books that are written about bettering ourselves, gaining the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, often also have a lot of weak narrations. It's possibly because the writers of these books, this has famously happened in famous books like Imam al-Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, this text, Imam Muhasibi's text, Abu Talib Makki's Qutul Qulub, and some other texts of this nature, where the texts themselves are extremely valuable, really widely accepted. The whole ummah likes them, but from a hadith point of view, there are weak narrations in them. In more recent times, Shaykh Zakaria Kandalwi's Fadailul A'mal, although it's not called Fadailul A'mal originally, which Tablighi brothers and sisters read a lot. These books are, on the one hand, very widely accepted. Millions of people use them and read them, but on the other hand, they also face criticism because they have some weak narrations. And the reason for it is because of this opinion, which is actually the majority opinion, that weak hadith can be used in matters of virtue. However, where even these books end up falling foul of the rule is that although weak hadiths are accepted, there are very few opinions that justify. There are ways to understand how very weak hadiths or even fabricated hadiths end up in these books. But strictly speaking, the rule is that only weak hadiths can be used according to the principle that I just mentioned. But very weak hadith, so very weak, da'if jiddan, is also an official category of hadith, and fabricated hadiths cannot be used. It's not permissible to use those. And therefore we have to assume that when a book such as this or any scholar's book ends up with a very weak hadith or a fabricated hadith, then a very weak hadith or a fabricated hadith has been used or included in their books by mistake, meaning they included the fabricated hadith or the very weak hadith because they didn't realize it was fabricated, or because in their opinion, at the time, according to their knowledge at the time, they did not believe that hadith was fabricated or is fabricated, or a hadith that they might have included in their work that is very weak, in their opinion, may not have been very weak, may have just been weak. So I'm going to stop there because I don't want to get technical about the whole issue of hadith classifications. But hopefully you understand the general idea. I suppose the takeaway here is that just in the tradition of the ulama, in the tradition of Islam, we have this long history of recognizing that sometimes when weak hadiths are used in a text, this has never been an obstacle to benefiting from that text if the text has value in terms of learning, in terms of knowledge, in terms of spirituality, in terms of inspiration. And what ulama and their attitude with regards to these types of texts is to recognize the benefit in them and then to highlight where there is a weakness in a narration, right? So they've chosen to benefit and rectify rather than discard, which is a very, very pragmatic attitude with regards to knowledge, mashallah. And the same has happened, for example, in Imam Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin, an amazing text, but it had this issue of weak hadiths and so on. So rather than discard the benefit of the text and discard the text altogether, the Imam Zainuddin al-Iraqi, a famous muhaddith, after Imam al-Ghazali, went and researched every single narration in Ihya Ulumuddin so that people could benefit from Ihya Ulumuddin, but also easily through Imam Iraqi's research know which of the hadiths Imam Ghazali has used are acceptable and which of the hadiths he has used are weak, right? So now what happens is you end up with double benefit. On the one hand, you benefit from the content of the book itself, but also you benefit from knowing a lot about hadiths that are weak and hadiths that are acceptable.